Think popping an aspirin is your only option when you're sick? Victorians had different ideas. In the 19th century, the line between food and medicine barely existed. Your kitchen cupboard was your pharmacy. Feeling weak? Beef tea. Can't sleep? Opium syrup. Chest cold. Mustard plaster. Stomach problems. Try some arsenic. Doctors prescribed foods for every imaginable ailment, and families relied on generations of kitchen remedies passed down through recipe books that mixed dinner instructions with medical advice. Some of these treatments actually worked. Others were useless. A few could kill you. Let's step into the Victorian medicine cabinet and see what they were really eating to stay healthy. Cod liver oil. Cod liver oil was Victorian medicine's most hated but most effective remedy. The taste was revolting, but doctors prescribed it relentlessly for weakness, tuberculosis, rickets, and general poor health. The oil came from cod livers, processed and bottled for medicinal use. A spoonful daily was standard, though severe cases received larger doses. Victorian children dreaded the daily ritual of cod liver oil, but parents insisted because doctors claimed it prevented disease. The interesting part, this actually worked. Cod liver oil is rich in vitamins A and D, along with omega-3 fatty acids. Victorian children suffering from rickets, caused by vitamin D deficiency, improved dramatically on cod liver oil. Victorian doctors had no understanding of vitamins. Medical journals from the 1860s document successful rickets treatments without understanding the biochemistry involved. The oil's effectiveness led to widespread use. Pharmacies stocked multiple brands. Manufacturers tried various processing methods to improve the taste, with limited success. Some added flavoring, but nothing could disguise the distinctive fish liver taste. Working-class families bought cheaper, less processed cod liver oil that tasted even worse than premium brands. The economic divide existed even in medicine. Wealthier families could afford better-tasting versions, while poor children choked down rancid fish oil. The treatment continued because results were visible. Weak, sickly children improved on cod liver oil. Bone deformities from rickets showed measurable correction. Victorian doctors stumbled onto one of the era's most effective treatments, despite having no idea why it worked. Beef tea. Beef tea was Victorian medicine's answer to nearly everything. Weakness, illness, recovery from surgery, general malaise. Doctors prescribed beef tea constantly. The preparation involved simmering beef in water for hours to extract the juices, then straining out the solids. What remained was a thin, brownish liquid that tasted vaguely of meat. Medical texts from the 1860s called it concentrated nutrition in liquid form. Florence Nightingale championed beef tea for hospital patients. Her notes on nursing describe precise preparation methods and recommended quantities. She believed it provided strength without taxing the digestive system. The logic had some merit. Beef tea contains amino acids, minerals, and some vitamins extracted from the meat. For patients too weak to eat solid food, it offered calories and nutrients in easily digestible form. Victorian households kept beef tea simmering constantly when someone fell ill. Mrs. Beeton's cookbook includes multiple beef tea recipes with specific instructions for different conditions. Fever required one preparation, general weakness another. The problem was scale. Victorians believed beef tea was far more nutritious than it actually is. A cup of beef tea contains minimal calories and protein compared to actual meat. Patients maintained on beef tea alone would slowly starve, though they might feel temporarily better from the warmth and salt. Medical journals from the 1880s began questioning beef tea's effectiveness, but the practice continued well into the 20th century. The belief in its healing powers outlasted any scientific support. Raw oysters for vigor. Oysters held a special place in Victorian medical thinking. Doctors recommended them for weakness, nervous disorders, and particularly for male vigor. The prescription was specific. Eat them raw, preferably first thing in the morning. Cooking supposedly destroyed their medicinal properties. Medical texts from the 1870s describe oysters as strengthening and restorative, particularly for the reproductive system. This belief had ancient roots, but Victorians embraced it enthusiastically. Oysters were cheap and widely available, making them accessible medicine for working-class families. A dozen oysters for breakfast supposedly restored vitality better than any tonic. The zinc content in oysters actually does support various bodily functions, including immune health. Victorian doctors stumbled onto something legitimate, though they understood none of the biochemistry involved. The danger came from sourcing. As discussed in our street food video, Victorian oysters came from heavily polluted waters. The medicine often delivered typhoid, cholera, or other diseases alongside any nutritional benefits. Upper-class Victorians could afford oysters from cleaner sources, but working-class families buying cheap oysters from street vendors frequently got more than they bargained for. Medical records show repeated disease outbreaks traced to contaminated oysters, yet the practice continued because the belief in their healing properties was too strong. Onion syrup for coughs. Every Victorian household knew how to make onion syrup, the standard home remedy for coughs and chest complaints. The recipe was simple. Slice onions, layer them with sugar or honey, let the mixture sit overnight. The onions released their juices, creating a syrupy liquid that was administered by the spoonful. This remedy appears in practically every Victorian household management book. The preparation varied slightly. Some added vinegar, others included herbs, but the basic principle remained constant across all social classes. The treatment wasn't entirely foolish. Onions contain compounds with mild antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. The sugar coating made the strong taste bearable, particularly for children. Victorian mothers administered onion syrup at the first sign of a cough. Multiple doses throughout the day, continued until symptoms improved. Some families mixed it with hot water to make an onion tea, considered even more effective for severe chest colds. The remedy worked well enough that it persisted into the 20th century. Modern herbalists still acknowledge onions' medicinal properties, though pharmaceutical cough suppressants have largely replaced kitchen remedies. The main limitation was effectiveness. Onion syrup might soothe a minor cough, but did nothing for serious respiratory infections. Victorian families sometimes delayed seeking proper medical care because they trusted their onion syrup would eventually work. Brandy for everything. Victorian doctors prescribed brandy as medicine for shock, weakness, fainting, chest complaints, and digestive issues. The standard prescription involved administering brandy in hot water, sometimes with sugar. Medical textbooks specified doses: 1 tablespoon for mild symptoms, up to a wine glass for serious conditions. Brandy appeared in hospital wards, sick rooms, and family medicine cabinets. The logic centered on stimulation. Victorian medicine believed brandy stimulated the heart and circulation, providing immediate strength to weakened patients. One medical text from 1875 states that brandy rallies the vital powers and supports the system through crisis. Florence Nightingale opposed excessive brandy use in hospitals, but acknowledged its place in treatment. Her nursing notes describe appropriate situations for brandy administration while warning against overuse. The alcohol did produce immediate effects: warmth, relaxation, temporary energy. These short-term improvements convinced Victorians of brandy's healing powers. Patients felt better immediately after a dose, which seemed like proof of effectiveness. The problems were obvious in hindsight. Brandy masks symptoms without treating underlying conditions. The warming sensation comes from dilating blood vessels, which can actually be dangerous in some situations. Regular medicinal brandy use led to alcohol dependency in many Victorian patients. Doctors prescribed brandy so routinely that alcoholism became a medical concern. Victorian medical journals include articles discussing medicinal addiction and debating appropriate brandy doses. The cure was creating new problems. If you're still here after learning about medicinal brandy, you might as well subscribe. It gets weirder. Vinegar for everything. Vinegar appeared in Victorian medical remedies constantly, cleaning wounds, aiding digestion, preventing infection, reducing fever. Vinegar supposedly did it all. Vinegar water was administered internally for digestive complaints. A tablespoon of vinegar in a glass of water, drunk before meals, supposedly improved digestion and prevented illness. This remedy appears across all social classes in household accounts. External applications were equally common. Vinegar-soaked cloths treated fevers, headaches, and bruises. Wounds were cleaned with diluted vinegar before bandaging. Sore throats were gargled with vinegar water. The acetic acid in vinegar does have mild antibacterial properties. Victorian households accidentally used a legitimate disinfectant, though at concentrations too weak for serious infection control. One particularly widespread use involved vinegar inhalations for respiratory problems. Boiling vinegar in water, then breathing the steam supposedly cleared congestion and prevented disease. Victorian households filled their homes with vinegar vapor at the first sign of illness. The practice caused its own problems. Strong vinegar inhalations could irritate airways and damage sensitive tissues. Some Victorian medical journals warned against excessive vinegar use, but popular belief in its healing properties persisted. Vinegar remedies continued partly because they were cheap. Working-class families couldn't afford pharmaceutical medicines but could always obtain vinegar. Kitchen medicine was economic medicine. Gruel for invalids. Gruel, thin porridge made from oatmeal and water, was standard invalid food throughout the Victorian era. Doctors prescribed it for anyone too ill to eat regular food, believing it provided gentle nutrition that wouldn't tax the digestive system. The preparation involved boiling oatmeal in water until it broke down into a thin, drinkable consistency. Some recipes added milk, but medical gruel was typically just oats and water, sometimes with a pinch of salt. Charles Dickens made gruel famous in Oliver Twist, but its association with workhouses obscured its widespread medical use. Middle and upper-class households also prepared gruel for sick family members. The reasoning had some validity. Oats contained soluble fiber, vitamins, and minerals. For patients with digestive problems or those recovering from serious illness, gruel provided calories and nutrients in easily digestible form. Victorian medical texts specified gruel for specific conditions. Fever patients received plain gruel. Digestive complaints required gruel made with barley instead of oats. Recovering surgery patients graduated to gruel before returning to solid food. The limitation was nutritional. Gruel alone couldn't sustain someone long-term. Patients maintained exclusively on gruel would develop deficiencies, but Victorian doctors believed they were providing complete nutrition. The psychological impact mattered too. Gruel symbolized sickness. Being prescribed gruel meant you were seriously ill. The transition back to solid food marked recovery. Food and medicine were inseparable in Victorian medical thinking. Port wine for blood disorders. Port wine held a privileged position in Victorian medicine. Doctors prescribed it for anemia, weakness, and what they called poor blood. The prescription was specific: a glass of port wine daily, sometimes more for severe cases. Medical textbooks recommended particular types of port for different conditions. Ruby port for acute weakness, tawny port for chronic conditions. The iron content in port wine provided some actual benefit for anemia sufferers. Victorian doctors observed that patients improved on port wine, though they couldn't explain the mechanism. They attributed healing to the wine's strengthening properties rather than understanding iron's role in blood production. Upper-class invalids consumed considerable quantities of medicinal port. Account books from wealthy households show regular port purchases, specifically for medical use, separate from table wine. The class divide was stark. Working-class patients couldn't afford port wine, leaving them without this particular remedy. Some doctors prescribed cheaper fortified wines as substitutes, but these were considered inferior medicine. Pregnant women received port wine prescriptions regularly. Victorian doctors believed it prevented anemia and strengthened both mother and child. Medical texts from the 1880s recommend port throughout pregnancy and after childbirth. The alcohol content created obvious problems. Regular port consumption led to dependency in many patients. Victorian medical journals debated appropriate doses while failing to address the fundamental issue of prescribing alcohol as medicine. Some patients improved despite the alcohol, not because of it. The iron helped anemia sufferers genuinely, but the benefits came with the cost of potential alcoholism. Mustard plasters. Mustard plasters were the go-to remedy for chest complaints, bronchitis, pneumonia, and any respiratory problem. Nearly every Victorian household knew how to make and apply them. The preparation involved mixing ground mustard with flour and water to create a paste, spreading it on cloth, and applying it to the chest or back. The mustard irritated the skin, producing intense warmth and redness. Victorian medical theory believed that drawing blood to the skin's surface relieved internal congestion. The burning sensation supposedly indicated the treatment was working. Medical texts provided detailed instructions for mustard plaster application, including timing and placement. The practice was painful. Mustard plasters could cause severe skin irritation, blistering, and burns if left on too long. Victorian medical journals include warnings about proper timing, typically 15 to 30 minutes maximum. Children particularly suffered from mustard plasters. Parents applied them at the first sign of chest cold, believing early treatment prevented serious illness. The screaming child with a burning mustard plaster became a common Victorian sickroom scene. The treatment provided no real benefit for respiratory infections. The warmth might have felt soothing temporarily, without affecting the underlying condition. Pneumonia patients received mustard plasters when they needed actual medical intervention. The practice continued because families saw improvement and assumed the mustard plaster helped. Most respiratory infections resolve on their own given time. The timing of recovery coincided with mustard plaster use, creating false correlation. Mustard plasters remained popular into the early 20th century, despite growing medical evidence of their uselessness. Milk puddings for digestive complaints. Milk puddings, rice pudding, tapioca sago were prescribed for anyone with digestive problems. Victorian doctors believed these bland, easily digested foods soothed the stomach and intestines. The prescription came with specific preparation instructions. Cook the pudding until very soft. Add minimal sugar. Serve warm but not hot. Medical texts specified which pudding for which condition: rice for diarrhea, tapioca for general weakness, sago for fever. This remedy appears constantly in Victorian household management books. Middle-class wives learned to prepare multiple types of milk pudding for sick family members. The sickroom diet consisted largely of milk puddings and gruel. For some conditions, this approach helped. Bland, easily digestible foods do allow the digestive system to recover from certain illnesses. Rice pudding won't cure anything, but it won't make things worse either. The problem came from over-reliance. Victorian doctors prescribed milk pudding diets for weeks or months, leading to nutritional deficiencies. Patients weakened from lack of proper nutrition, while doctors insisted the bland diet was essential for healing. Lactose intolerance wasn't understood in Victorian times. Many patients suffered worse digestive problems from the milk-heavy remedies, but were told to continue because medical theory said milk puddings were healing. Children particularly suffered on extended milk pudding diets. Growing bodies need diverse nutrition, but sick Victorian children might spend months eating nothing but rice pudding and gruel, while doctors insisted this was proper medical care. Arrowroot for weakness. Arrowroot, a starchy powder from tropical plants, was Victorian medicine's gentle nutrition for the weak and ill. Doctors prescribed it for invalids, children, elderly patients, and anyone recovering from serious illness. The powder was mixed with milk or water to create a thin, bland drink. Some recipes added sugar or lemon, but medical arrowroot was typically plain. The texture was slippery and slightly gelatinous, which Victorian doctors believed made it easy to digest. Medical textbooks praised arrowroot as ideal invalid food. One 1870s medical guide states that arrowroot nourishes without burdening the system. Doctors prescribed it when patients couldn't tolerate heavier foods. The nutritional reality was less impressive. Arrowroot is almost pure starch, mostly empty calories with minimal vitamins or minerals. Patients maintained on arrowroot received energy but little else. The high cost made arrowroot a middle and upper-class remedy. Working-class families couldn't afford it, using cheaper alternatives like flour-thickened water. The economic divide in medicine was stark. Victorian households kept arrowroot powder in their medicine cupboards alongside other remedies. A sick child would receive arrowroot mixed with warm milk throughout the day. Adults recovering from illness graduated to arrowroot before returning to solid food. The remedy persisted because patients did eventually recover, and the arrowroot seemed helpful. In reality, most people recovered despite the arrowroot, not because of it. The bland starch provided calories without providing much actual nutrition. Raw liver for anemia. Victorian doctors occasionally prescribed raw liver for severe anemia, though this remedy was less common than port wine or beef tea. The prescription was straightforward, if unpleasant. Eat raw liver, minced or in small pieces, daily until symptoms improved. Some doctors recommended liver juice extracted by pressing raw liver through cloth. This treatment actually worked. Liver is rich in iron and vitamin B12, both crucial for blood production. Anemia patients genuinely improved on raw liver, making it one of Victorian medicine's accidentally correct treatments. The problem was knowing when to prescribe it. Victorian doctors couldn't diagnose anemia accurately. They recognized symptoms, weakness, pallor, fatigue, but couldn't determine the underlying cause. Raw liver helped iron deficiency anemia, but did nothing for other conditions causing similar symptoms. The taste and texture made this remedy extremely unpopular. Patients resisted eating raw liver even when doctors insisted it was essential. Some families tried cooking the liver lightly, though doctors warned this destroyed the medicinal properties. Upper-class patients could afford the freshest, highest quality liver. Working-class patients had to use whatever they could obtain, which might be days old and partially spoiled. The class divide extended even to medical liver quality. The treatment declined as understanding of nutrition improved. By the late Victorian period, doctors began recommending cooked liver, which patients tolerated better. The medicinal benefit remained, but the unpleasant raw preparation was abandoned. Lemon juice for scurvy. By the Victorian era, lemon juice for scurvy was established medicine, though understanding why it worked remained unclear. The British Navy had been issuing lime juice to sailors since the late 1700s, effectively eliminating scurvy on long voyages. This success made citrus juice an accepted medical treatment, though doctors couldn't explain the mechanism. Victorian ships carried lemon or lime juice as standard medical supplies. Sailors received daily rations, particularly on long voyages. The practice was so well established that British sailors acquired the nickname limeys. On land, scurvy was less common, but still occurred. Victorian doctors prescribed lemon juice for suspected scurvy, along with fresh vegetables when available. The treatment worked quickly. Scurvy symptoms improved within days of vitamin C intake. The Victorian understanding of scurvy remained confused. Some doctors believed it was caused by salt meat, others by poor ventilation, still others by miasmas. They knew lemon juice cured it, but couldn't explain vitamins or vitamin C deficiency. Working-class urban Victorians sometimes developed scurvy during winter when fresh food was scarce and expensive. Doctors prescribed lemon juice, but poor families couldn't always afford it. The remedy was known, but not always accessible. This represents Victorian medicine's accidental success. They found an effective treatment through observation and maintained it through tradition, despite lacking any scientific understanding of why it worked. Beef tea with wine. When beef tea alone seemed insufficient, Victorian doctors added wine to create a more powerful remedy. The combination appeared constantly in medical prescriptions. 1 part wine to 2 parts beef tea, administered several times daily for weakness or recovery from illness. Medical textbooks specified which wines worked best: port for serious weakness, sherry for digestive complaints. This remedy combined two of Victorian medicine's favourite treatments. If beef tea strengthened and wine stimulated, obviously combining them would provide double benefit. The alcohol content meant patients received stimulation, along with whatever nutrients the beef tea provided. They felt immediately better, warmer, more relaxed, temporarily energized. This reinforced belief in the treatment's effectiveness. Hospitals administered beef tea and wine to post-surgical patients regularly. Florence Nightingale's notes describe the practice while expressing some reservations about wine quantities. She supported moderate use, but opposed the excessive amounts some doctors prescribed. The class divide was obvious. Upper-class patients received quality wines mixed with properly prepared beef tea. Hospital charity patients got whatever cheap wine was available, mixed with thin beef broth. The combination created dependency problems. Patients came to expect their regular doses of wine-fortified beef tea and resisted discontinuing it even after recovering. Victorian doctors struggled with patients who insisted they still needed their medicinal wine. Long-term use provided minimal nutrition, while potentially causing alcoholism. The immediate feel-good effects masked the treatment's fundamental inadequacy. Barley water. Barley water was prescribed for fever, urinary problems, and general illness. Victorian doctors considered it cooling and soothing, ideal for patients with inflammatory conditions. The preparation involved boiling pearl barley in water for extended periods, then straining out the grain. The resulting liquid was slightly cloudy and mildly sweet. Some recipes added lemon juice or sugar, but medical barley water was typically plain. Medical texts from the 1860s praised barley water for fever management. One guide states that barley water cools the system without depressing it. Doctors prescribed it as the primary beverage for fever patients, who might drink nothing else for days. The remedy had some merit. Barley water provided hydration and small amounts of nutrients. For fever patients who needed fluid replacement, this offered genuine benefit. The mild flavor meant most patients could tolerate it even when appetite was poor. Victorian households prepared barley water at the first sign of fever. A pot of barley water simmering on the stove indicated someone was ill. Family members took turns administering spoonfuls throughout the day and night. The limitation was over-reliance. Barley water became a substitute for proper fever management. Families kept feverish patients on barley water while serious infections went untreated. The cooling properties were believed so strongly that other interventions seemed unnecessary. Children particularly spent long periods drinking barley water while parents waited for fever to break naturally. Sometimes this approach worked because the illness was minor. Other times, serious conditions went unrecognized until too late. So what did Victorians really eat when they got sick? Everything from beef tea to raw liver, from cod liver oil to medicinal brandy. The Victorian kitchen was the Victorian pharmacy because there weren't many alternatives. Families did their best with limited knowledge and limited resources, trying to keep each other alive using whatever foods might help. Have you ever tried any of these medicines? Did it work? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this look at Victorian medical practices, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about how people really lived and tried to stay healthy in the past. Thanks for watching.